They laughed when the old farmer bought 9,400 acres of dead pine ridge. Not chuckled, laughed. The kind of laughter that follows a man out of the feed store and meets him again at the gas pump. Caleb Rusk finally paid money for land even the deer avoid. That was the favorite line for a while. Somebody else said he had bought a lifetime supply of ticks. Another said the only thing growing out there was bankruptcy. Caleb heard most of it. He heard it at McAvoy's diner, while men half his age leaned over chipped coffee mugs and explained, with great confidence, why the purchase made no sense. The ridge was too steep for crops, too tangled for cattle, too thin for timber, too far from town for houses, too dry in summer, too frozen in winter, and too forgotten the rest of the year. 9,400 acres of trouble. That was what they called it. Caleb never corrected them. He would sit in the corner booth by the window, one hand around a cup of black coffee, his weathered hat resting beside the salt shaker, and look past the glass toward the blue-black line of hills beyond Harlan County. Those hills had a name. Bracken Ridge. Locals said it like a warning. The place had been logged hard in the 1960s, burned twice in the 1980s, and abandoned after the last timber company decided the roads cost more than the trees. The old logging tracks had sunk into mud, the culverts were crushed. 2 hunting cabins leaned sideways in the brush. There were rusted cable reels under the pines, a collapsed loading platform near the creek, and miles of tangled scrub where sunlight barely touched the ground. Nobody wanted it. Not seriously. The county had tried selling pieces of it for years. Investors came with plans, maps, optimism, and clean boots. They always left with the same answer: too remote, too expensive, too little return. So when Caleb Rusk, a 73-year-old widowed farmer with a patched denim coat and a pickup that coughed before it started, signed papers for the whole ridge, the town decided age had finally outrun judgment. He did not just buy it, he risked almost everything to get it. He borrowed against his cattle land, sold 2 tractors he had kept running for decades, emptied savings that had survived drought, medical bills, and his wife's long illness. All for land nobody else could explain. Then he did something that made the jokes worse. Nothing. No subdivision signs, no sawmill crews, no gravel pits, no fence crews stretching bright new wire for miles. For the first year, Bracken Ridge sat exactly as it had before, dark, quiet, and useless from the road. Caleb kept feeding his cattle before sunrise, kept repairing gates with baling wire, kept driving the same old truck through town with a cracked windshield and hay dust on the dashboard. But twice a week, sometimes 3 times, people saw him turn off the county road and disappear into the ridge, not with a crew, not with equipment. Alone, he carried a shovel, a thermos, and a blue notebook. That notebook became part of the town's gossip. Some said he had found a buried payroll from the timber days. Some said he knew about minerals. A few said grief had made him strange, and walking those empty hills was the only place he could still talk to his wife. Caleb gave them nothing. Silence does that to a town. It makes people fill the blank with whatever story makes them feel smartest. But the truth had started long before Caleb bought Bracken Ridge. It began when he was a boy standing beside his father in a bean field that everyone called worthless. Back then, the field flooded every spring. Neighbors mocked Caleb's father for keeping it. Then the state built a roadbed higher than the old wagon path. Drainage changed. Trucks could reach the valley, and that same worthless field became the best produce ground in 3 counties. Caleb never forgot it. His father said something that stayed with him longer than any sermon. Land ain't only what it is. Land is what the world will need from it. Most people heard that and thought it meant soil. Caleb heard something bigger. He watched towns bloom when a highway arrived, watched farms die when a factory closed, watched cheap pasture become warehouse land because somebody needed flat ground near an exit, and he learned a quieter lesson. The most important use for land is not always growing something on it. Sometimes the value is in what the land keeps away. Noise, crowds, light, neighbors, interference, complaints. That was what pulled his attention toward Bracken Ridge. Not the trees, not the creek, not the thin soil, the emptiness. The ridge sat in a long bowl of granite hills, nearly 20 miles from the nearest town limit. There were no schools nearby, no subdivisions pressing against the border, no busy lake, no tourist road, no church camp, no cell tower cluster, and almost no night light after sundown. It had one old rail spur buried in weeds at the southern edge, one state power easement crossing the far slope, two washed out service roads that could still be rebuilt, and mile after mile of land where a loud test, a bright tower, or a restricted zone would bother almost nobody. To everyone else, that made the property a burden. To Caleb, it made the place rare. For years, he had clipped articles from farm papers, county bulletins, engineering magazines left behind at the library, and thick state planning documents no one else in town bothered to read. He noticed a pattern. Private companies were running out of places to test machines that needed space. Drones that carried medical supplies. Emergency communication towers that had to work after storms. High-altitude balloons, autonomous aircraft. Satellite ground stations. Systems that needed distance, legal buffer, clear sky, low population, and access to power. The world was becoming crowded with technology that still needed empty land. That thought would have sounded ridiculous inside McAvoy's diner, so Caleb did not explain it there. He bought the quiet, and let people laugh at the trees. The first 5 years nearly broke him. Taxes came whether the land made money or not. A spring storm ripped open 3 miles of road, and dropped pines across every trail. One dry August, lightning started a fire on the west slope, and Caleb spent 2 nights beside volunteer crews cutting a firebreak with a rented dozer he could barely afford. Insurance refused to cover one section. A survey dispute with a timber heir cost him 6 months of paperwork. More than once, Caleb stood on the ridge at dusk, looking across dark pines and red clay cuts, and wondered whether the town had been right. Maybe he had bought trouble. Maybe he had mistaken patience for wisdom. Maybe all he owned was a giant silence that would eat him piece by piece. But even then, he kept doing the small things. Nobody noticed. He cleared the old service roads, just enough for a truck to pass, marked the creek crossings, paid the taxes on time, filed maps with the county, refused to sell off small corners when hunters offered cash, kept the ridge whole. That mattered more than anyone understood, because the future was not coming for 5 acres, it was coming for a place no one had broken apart. In the 9th year, strange news began appearing in places most people ignored. A hurricane on the coast had knocked out emergency towers for days. A hospital network had begun testing long-range delivery drones for blood and medicine. Federal regulators were opening new corridors for unmanned aircraft. A communications company announced plans for rural satellite relay sites that needed low interference and large security buffers. Then came the article Caleb read 3 times at his kitchen table before the sun came up. A private aviation and communications consortium was searching for a remote test range in the central states. Not a factory, not a farm. A test range. The requirements were printed plainly. Thousands of uninterrupted acres, low population density, natural terrain shielding, road access that could be upgraded, nearby power transmission, minimal light pollution. clear airspace negotiations. Caleb looked out his kitchen window toward the dark shape of Bracken Ridge. Then he folded the paper and went outside to feed the cattle. He still told no one. 3 weeks later, the first white survey truck came through town. People noticed immediately. A truck like that in Harlan County might as well have had a parade behind it. 2 more arrived the next day. Then, a black SUV with out-of-state plates. Men in field jackets bought coffee at McAvoy's and asked how to reach the south gate of Bracken Ridge. The diner went quiet. By noon, half the county had a theory. Power company, government project, wind farm, prison, pipeline. The theories got louder when the vehicles turned into Caleb's lane. A woman at the feed store watched 3 officials step onto his porch carrying rolled maps. A meeting that should have lasted 20 minutes lasted nearly 4 hours. After that, Caleb's quiet ridge began to speak in a language the town could not ignore. Fresh survey stakes appeared along the south road. A helicopter moved slowly above the tree line. Crews reopened the old rail spur and found the ballast still stable beneath the weeds. Engineers hiked the ridges with tablets and orange flags. County officials stopped laughing in public and started holding closed meetings. Then the truth finally leaked. The consortium wanted Bracken Ridge. Not part of it. Not a strip. The whole preserved bowl of land. They needed a secure rural test range for autonomous emergency aircraft, satellite relay infrastructure, and resilient communications. The very things Caleb had been reading about for years. The ridge's isolation was not a weakness anymore. It was the product. Its emptiness was not wasted space. It was protection. The granite hills reduced signal interference. The distance from town lowered noise complaints. The old rail spur made heavy materials possible. The power easement lowered infrastructure costs. The uninterrupted acreage created a legal buffer few places could match. Suddenly, the land nobody could use was the land nobody could replace. The same men who had mocked Caleb's purchase sat in McAvoy's diner staring into their coffee, as if the cups might explain it. Negotiations lasted 8 months. Lawyers came from the city. Engineers came back with thicker maps. State officials drove in quietly. The county, which had once treated Bracken Ridge like a tax burden, began describing it as a strategic development site. The first offer was bigger than anything Caleb had ever seen on paper. He refused it. Not because he was greedy. Because he knew what he owned now. He had not spent years holding the ridge together to sell it like a desperate man unloading scrap. The second offer included long-term lease rights. He refused that too. The third offer separated testing zones, conservation buffers, access rights, and a protected farm trust for his remaining land. That one made him sit alone at the kitchen table long after midnight. When the final agreement closed, the number never became fully public, but enough leaked for the county to understand. Caleb Rusk's investment had multiplied more than 40 times. The old farmer who had been called foolish was suddenly one of the richest landowners anyone in Harlan County had ever known. Yet the money was not what unsettled people most. Money can be explained away as luck. What disturbed them was the patience. Caleb had not stumbled into a lottery ticket. He had recognized a form of value the entire town had mistaken for emptiness. For 11 years, people had looked at Bracken Ridge and seen dead timber, bad roads, thin soil and distance. Caleb had looked at the same place and seen quiet. Quiet with access, quiet with power, quiet with legal room around it, quiet in a world that was running out of places to make noise. Construction began the following spring. Security fencing rose along the southern road. The old rail spur was cleared. Concrete pads appeared where pine needles had covered the ground for decades. Tall masts went up on the high points. At night, red aircraft lights blinked above the ridges like slow warning stars. People who used to joke about Caleb's wasted forest now slowed their trucks when they passed the entrance. Some still tried to make it sound simple. Lucky old man. But they said it softer, because deep down, they knew luck does not keep paying taxes through fire, storms, doubt, ridicule, and 11 years of no applause. One reporter from the city eventually found Caleb on his porch, wearing the same frayed coat he had worn before the deal. She expected a millionaire. She found a farmer mending a gate latch with a pocket file. She asked the question everyone wanted answered. How did you know they would need that land? Caleb leaned back and looked toward the ridge, where construction lights glowed faintly beyond the fields. I didn't know they would, he said. Then why buy it? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because everybody was pricing the trees. I was pricing the silence. The reporter did not speak. Caleb looked down at his hands, the nails still dark from soil. Folks think empty means useless, he added. But empty can be room, and room gets valuable when the world runs out of it. That line spread faster than the jokes ever had. Farmers repeated it at auctions. County officials used cleaner versions of it in meetings. Young men who had laughed at Caleb began looking at old maps differently. Not because every bad piece of land is a hidden fortune, most is not. That was never the lesson. The lesson was harder. Caleb had paid attention to what others dismissed. He had understood the difference between land that is unused and land that is unusable. He had carried risk without needing anyone to clap for him. He had waited while the world slowly became exactly strange enough to need what he owned. And perhaps that is why the story lasted. Not because a poor farmer became rich, not because a forgotten ridge became valuable, but because the people who laughed had been certain they were seeing clearly. They saw mud, he saw access. They saw distance. He saw buffer. They saw no crops. He saw no neighbors. They saw dead pines. He saw a place where the future could work without asking permission from 1,000 front porches. Years later, Caleb still lived in the same white farmhouse with peeling paint on the north wall. He still drank coffee before dawn. Still kept the blue notebook in the top drawer of his kitchen desk. Only now, beyond his pasture, the horizon glowed some nights with testing lights, and a low mechanical hum rolled over the hills like weather from another century. The ridge had changed. The town had changed with it. But Caleb remained almost exactly the same. A quiet farmer in worn boots sitting on a porch, watching the land do what land has always done, wait for the world to catch up. So when people in Harlan County talk about Bracken Ridge now, they do not call it useless. They do not call it dead. They do not laugh about the old man who bought trouble, because the land they thought was empty was never empty. It was holding the one thing the future ran out of: quiet.